Hello, I am the OBJ. Welcome to the OBJ show. So I'm going to be talking about AI and how AI is going to become the new agentic operating systems, which is something I've been trying to formulate for a while. Anyway, I'm going to start and I'll get on with that, and I'll add it in between what I'm planning to say anyway. So let's call this the silent steward, the person that's taking control of things, because for decades the actual operating system has been the silent steward of our digital lives, from the command lines of Unix in the 1970s, which was pioneered by Ken Thompson and Dennis Ritchie at Bell Labs, to the elegant graphical windows of Apple's Mac OS and the touch-friendly world of Android, which was developed by Andy Rubin and his team, and which was later acquired by Google, and of course ubiquitous Windows, the OS, which everyone or most people have heard of, I'd say, and the OS has always acted as a mediator. It's a complex layer set between us and the machine, translating our inputs, clicks, taps, keystrokes and instructions into instructions that the hardware can actually understand. So in short, we've had to learn to speak the computer's higher level interaction in order to communicate with files, folders and applications. But that relationship is about to be turned completely onto its head. The operating system, as we know it, is built around a fundamental assumption that humans must initiate everything. We're the conductors and the OS is the orchestra, sitting patiently waiting for us to wave our batons. And the rise of agentic artificial intelligence AI systems that can reason, plan and act independently towards a goal smashes this assumption to pieces. And it's the future. You know, we won't use operating systems. We'll delegate to agents, and the conventional OS, with its graphical interfaces and deeply nested folder structures, will quietly dissolve into the background, made obsolete by a new layer of machine intelligence. I'm going to take my glasses off because the reflections on them, someone told me that that's annoying. And I think it's annoying when I look back at the videos as well. So anyway, I knew there was going to be a paradigm shift, but I couldn't put my finger on it until now. You know, so come with me and explore what this means by what I'm going to say about what's happening and what computing will... 1, 2, brother. Okay, hello. I don't know, when I shout, everything starts working on the microphone. I don't know what that is all about. 1, 2. Okay. So, and I'll talk about what computing will actually look like once the actual desktop disappears. So, from interface to intention. The core problem with conventional operating systems is that they confuse operation with labor. Think about what it takes to send a simple email in Windows or Mac OS, Linux, or Android. You've got to find the mail application, open it, compose, type the recipient's address, write your message, finally hit send, and the operation's complete. But none of that reflects what you actually want to do. It reflects what the OS needs you to do. It's a series of procedural steps that it just can't skip. In effect, every user is forced to act as a kind of sort of low-level systems administrator for their own life every single day using a computer. Agentic AI promises to eliminate this procedural tax. Rather than a kernel, it's going to be using a layer that manages hardware and the hardware resources for applications. The foundational layer of a future computing device will be what researchers are beginning to call a LAM, a large action model. And this is a sophisticated AI that doesn't just understand what you say, but it understands what you mean and it can act on it. Companies like Rabbit Inc., who launched the R1, I don't know if anyone's ever seen one in a while, they launched that in 2024. And startups like Adept, founded by David Luan, formerly of OpenAI and Google Brain, they're already exploring this idea, training models not just to generate text, but to generate with software directly on your behalf. And the shift in practice would be dramatic. Today, you might say, I need to open Excel to create a budget. Tomorrow, you simply say to your device, plan my budget for the Italy trip next month, and an agentic system doesn't just open a spreadsheet, it will autonomously, I've got this word in my head, autonomously operate on your system, search your email for flight receipts, query your bank's API for current spending data, cross-reference your restaurant booking confirmations, and it will generate a predictive spreadsheet, all without you lifting a finger. It will then ask, shall I share this with your partner or whoever? And the OS is no longer the interface. The agent is the interface. And it's the death of the application. Yes, I said it, right? So the app, as we know it, is a relic of the OS era. Applications are essentially silos, self-contained containers designed to perform specific functions in isolation from one another. And the friction of modern computing lies precisely in moving data between these silos. You can copy a PDF from a browser, then attach it in a mail app, then save a receipt from a banking app, then manually type figures into a spreadsheet. You, the human, are the universal connector, a very expensive, error-prone bridge between programs that stubbornly refuse to talk to each other. Agentic AI heralds what we might call the rise of exo application, sitting on the outside, a model where there's no discrete apps at all. Instead, there are only capabilities. And these are orchestrated dynamically by the agent. The agent doesn't open a word processor. It doesn't create a text editing interface when the context call for it. It doesn't launch image editing software. It spins up image manipulation processes to adjust the lighting on a photo that you mentioned that you wanted to fix. It's a bit like the difference between hiring a specialist and hiring a single brilliant generalist who knows exactly which specialist to call and when to call them and for how long, etc. So once again, this was something that has lived in my head for the longest time. I had the idea of writing an app that could do everything back in 1998. It was an app that would allow you to write a letter, to edit an image or send an email, but it wasn't practical and the scale was horrendous, so I never got around to doing it. So this current agentic shift mirrors one of the biggest transitions in computing history. It's the shift from mainframe terminals where everyone shared or it's like the shift from mainframe terminals where everyone shared one big personal computer and they were connected with their terminals, where individuals had their own dedicated hardware, their own dedicated hardware. And this is enormous kind of outlay for companies and so on. But we're now looking at a shift of similar magnitude from a multi-app architecture of previous to a single agent architecture. When I say single agent, there'll be the single core agent, but then that will create other agents and ask them to do tasks. And just as nobody today thinks about the assembly code that renders a button on their screen, they'll soon stop thinking about which application to use for any given task. Now, the agent handles all of that composition. If a task requires accessing a database, generating a chart and emailing a summary, the agent quietly spins up 3 temporary microservices, executes the workflow, then shuts them down without you ever having to open a database client, a charting tool, or an email client. Now, I was talking about OpenClaw recently and the whole debacle around that, OpenClaw, Maltbot and so on, and how that was so powerful for me. It hit me so hard. I ended up arguing with 4 of my friends who claimed to be tech guys, and they were clueless as to what the power of this was. All they were talking about was the security flaws, all of them. And I was like, you guys cannot see the future. It's not about seeing that it's just going to be agentic. It's going to be agentic in this way until something else comes along, of course. So if you look at the OS, or let's say I've got an operating system, the OS from now on. So if you look at the OS as a kind of ghost, it's going to be dealing with file management, hardware, and security in a way that's never been done before. If agents handle applications, what happens to the operating system's other core jobs? Every OS has let's say 3 fundamental responsibilities beyond running apps: managing files, abstracting software, and enforcing security. And in the agentic future, all 3 of these functions will be transformed beyond recognition. File management's going to vanish. The hierarchical folder structure, which is a system of organising files in nested directories, that dates back to Multics in the 1960s and was later popularised by Dungal Engelbart's pioneering work on human-computer interaction. And it's essentially a digital metaphor for a physical filing cabinet. And it was a necessary convention when storage was expensive and search was slow. And that leads me to something else, just on the sidetrack. It riles me that philosophers and always relate our current way of thinking to the technology that we're using. And a lot of them are saying now, like Daniel Dennett, our consciousness is just an interface to the real world, and they kind of relate it to files and folders and computer subsystems. And we've done that historically. Every time we try to work out who and what we are, we relate it to the current latest and greatest technology. No. Anyway, it's always been awkward. So How many times have you lost a document because you just can't remember which folder you saved it in? Obviously, you've got search and so on, but even then, sometimes it doesn't happen. But in an agentic future, storage becomes semantic rather than hierarchical, and you won't save a file to a folder on your desktop. You'll tell the agent to remember this contract. And then later you might ask, where's the indemnity clause in the contract that I discussed with Sarah last week? Let's see if you've got someone called Sarah working at your company, of course. And the agent retrieves the information based on contextual understanding, meaning relationships, timing, rather than directory paths. And the concept of the file as a discrete unit you might have personally had before or personally managed, it disappears. Data becomes a fluid entity stored and retrieved by the agent's memory, much like the way a personal assistant would remember any important documents without filing them in an actual cabinet. Hardware abstraction will become dynamic. Today's OS manages hardware drivers and allocates processor resources so that the applications can run. It's a mostly invisible job, but a vital one. In the agentic future, this responsibility shifts to the agent and becomes intelligent rather than mechanical. If you ask the agent to render a complex 3D model, it will temporarily allocate maximum GPU resources. If you simply ask it to listen out for an important notification while you sleep, it will throttle power consumption to near zero. And there are no settings panels to navigate, no task manager to monitor, and the agent optimizes the hardware in real time, guided by your expressed priorities. Now, researchers at MIT's Computer Science and Artificial Intelligence Laboratory, CSAIL, and organisations like DeepMind, founded by Demis Hassabis, and he's a protein folding guy from Google, and somebody I would recommend listening to on many podcast interviews that he's, that are doing the rounds of a lot of these technologies at the moment. Shane Legg and Mustafa Suleyman, they've been working on AI systems that can reason about resource allocation, and the idea that an AI could manage hardware dynamically the way a skilled engineer manages a life system is no longer science fiction. Now, security, that's going to be transformed. Security is perhaps where the change will be most radical. Conventional OS security is permission-based. And apps, they ask whether your microphone or your can be accessed or your files, and you click yes or no. And this binary system is notoriously brittle. Now, most users click yes reflexively without even kind of reading the whole request, and malware writers exploit this trust relentlessly. And it was a problem identified as far back as 2003 when Bill Gates launched Microsoft's Trustworthy Computing initiative in a response to a wave of catastrophic security breaches. But agentic security, by contrast, is identity-based and behavioral. Rather than an OS blindly running any code a user installs, a future agentic system would run nothing unless it's authorized by the primary agent. Now, think of the agent as a highly alert guard dog. If you install a new tool, the agent vets its code, runs in a sandbox environment, and monitors its behavior continuously. And if a rogue sub-process attempts to exfiltrate your data, sending files somewhere that you wouldn't want them to go, the primary agent, which has built up a detailed model of your normal behavioral patterns, shuts it down instantly. Now, researchers at Anthropic, founded by Dario Amodei and Daniela Amodei, formerly of OpenAI, are working on exactly these kinds of constitutional AI frameworks, where an AI system is trained to actively uphold safe and ethical behaviours rather than simply responding to permissions. Now, this leads me to another idea, which is that I spoke about this a long time ago also. Sorry, little trumpet blow. But it's that there's not going to be one general AI that works really well. This is why the agents are working. We need an AI that's comprised of AIs, and that will build a complete AI for us. For me, Europe are savages. Capitalistic, greedy savages, and the whole remit there is about gaining and taking more and like imperialism. They're not at fault. That's the way the world's worked. It's just that they're the most recent. And then, China, they've got their deep philosophical, I don't know if it's true, but this is how we see them. So I'm doing it from a Western perspective once again, view and so on. And they build that into the computers. And some may say it be communist and so on. But we're missing the heart once again, which is Africa. We need to build the African into the computer as well. So that we've got this heart, this grounded, this soul, this earthy part of computing, the ethical part. And that's what's missing, I think. And that's what's going to be missing for the while. So building the agents and building the PCs requires coming together of different nations with different mindsets, different cultures, simply so that we can continue to build these human-like creations with a heart and a soul. Anyway, my video goes off for 4 seconds. So this is all going to lead to a unified experience. Your agent everywhere all the time. And perhaps the most profound change of all will be the end of the device barrier. Right now, our operating systems are tied to specific pieces of hardware. You've got Windows on your laptop, iOS on your phone, some watch OS on your smartwatch, and each one is a separate identity. You've experienced the friction of this, I'm sure, and that can be that slightly annoying moment of picking up your phone to continue something you're doing on your laptop or trying to find a document you could swear you opened on your tablet. And in an agentic future, the agent lives in the cloud and your devices become thin clients, little more than sensors and output screens. You won't have a phone OS and a laptop OS, and this is the whole crux of what I'm talking about. The OS becomes AI. You simply have your agent. And once again, this was something I thought long and hard about many years ago. I created a living avatar called the Ego, the AEGO, alter ego, and it contained all of you. It could communicate with other units or other egos, such and as a form of like social media. And you could also join another large conglomerate of egos, which was like, say, the equivalent of Facebook, and you could plug your ego into it and you could give it only so much like information and give it so much access, which was a security kind of measure. But then you could go and talk to a business ego, for instance, or an app ego. I know it sounds crazy, but the idea is very much the same. So like you could want to write a letter and you kind of go and communicate with a word processor module, and that allows you to write a letter, and that connects to an email module, and you can send the email. So you didn't actually house any of the software. You just had your unit, which could walk around in this free world, and it would communicate with others or so in real time. And I think I just got too old, to be honest. I'm not going to make an excuse. I lost the drive. If I had that drive, or I thought about it in my 20s and like early 30s, I would have fully pursued the idea. But I thought about that like 1 years ago, whatever. I was 40 by then, and I was just like, didn't have the fire anymore. Anyhow, with the new agents, when you walk into your living room, the agent projects your interface onto the television. When you get into your car, your agent interfaces with the vehicle's head-up display. When you glance at your watch, the agent surfaces. When you look at your watch's surfaces, the agent replies with a succinct summary of what matters right now, because it knows what time it is. And the continuity isn't achieved through iCloud syncing or Bluetooth. It's achieved through a single persistent intelligence that knows your context, regardless of which hardware you happen to be holding. And this is fascinating, and this is why I've got my technology on. But at the same time, I'm so anti everything being like, right, this is being used just for capitalism and for controlling people, that part of me wants to be the hacker again. I need to learn this so that we can fight against the system. But at the same time, I'm like, who knows? With my intelligence and brilliance and this knowledge, someone's going to come and snap me up at some point and ask me for some consultation or to build something, even though I'm not programming much anyway, or at all, in fact. So this vision isn't entirely hypothetical. Ray Kurzweil, for instance, he's the futurist and Google's director of engineering now, and he's long predicted a convergence of human cognition with AI assistance. And more practically, projects like Microsoft's Copilot, annoying, and from what I hear, because I don't use Windows, from their initiative, and Google's Gemini integration across devices are early clumsy steps in exactly this, kind of direction. And the same AI assistant reaching across hardware boundaries to create a unified experience. It's going to be a bit of a rough ride for us, but the future's going to look okay and kind of co-joined for the people in the future. So there are some challenges which we can't ignore, and I think it's important to be clear about the obstacles. It's a discussion that needs to be had, and there are people and bodies talking of looking at all aspects of AI, from the actual tools and the builders and the developers and the companies, and what their goals are and so on. So an agentic AI future isn't inevitable, and it won't arrive without significant challenges. For instance, privacy is a serious concern, and an agent that knows your context across every device, every application, and every communication is also an agent that holds extraordinary amount of power with your personal data. Who owns that data? Who has access to it? The regulatory frameworks that govern data today, like the UK's Data Protection Act of 2018, and the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, you see that pop up when you've got to opt out of stuff. They were designed for a world of apps and browsers, not persistent AI agents, so it's going to need a rethink. And there are also questions of reliability and trust. What happens when your agent makes a mistake? If it misunderstands your intention and deletes an important contract or books the wrong flights, the consequences could be serious. And unlike a misbehaving app, which you can simply close or uninstall, a deeply embedded agent that has access to all your systems is harder to contain. Thinkers like Stuart Russell, professor of computer science at UC Berkeley and author of Human Compatible, have argued powerfully that we need to solve the problem of value alignment, ensuring AI systems actually understand and pursue what humans genuinely want before giving them this level of autonomy. But once again, we're humans, we're just going to fuck about, throw it out, wait for an accident to happen, and then put in all the safeguards, I think. And there's also questions of access and inequality. Powerful agentic computing will likely be expensive, at least, to start off with, as usual. And if only wealthy individuals and large organizations can afford the best agents, then, that's going to cause some problems, because once again, computing like now is going to create an uneven or a non-level playing field, and it could become more stratified. Now, the conversation that lays ahead that we need to have. The conventional operating system was without a doubt a masterpiece of engineering in the 20th century, designed to make new raw hardware manageable for human operators. Pioneers like Alan Turing, who theorized a universal computing machine, Grace Hopper, who developed some of the first practical compilers and was responsible for coming up with the term bug, by the way, and Linus Torvalds, who created the open source Linux kernel, all contributed to building the OS world as we know it. Their work was extraordinary and it shaped everything. Unfortunately, not all for good. I love this stuff right now, but at the same time, I think equally I'm not a fan of it. I don't think it's a direction we should be moving into. I've done a show just recently about the ecology is the future and how we're going to start moving towards building a better world. And the people who may lead in that may actually become our new role models and leaders. And we're going to let go of the technocrats, hopefully. But if not, while it's happening, if you've got the news, take part. You have to take part in whatever your world is in order to survive, to be honest, and be adaptive, waiting for the changes. However, in an era of generative and agentic AI, we're no longer operators, we're directors. The future of computing isn't a desktop, it isn't a dock or a folder structure, it's a conversation. Agentic AI will dismantle the application silos and file hierarchies that have defined computing for 40 years, and it's going to replace OS kernel with a reasoning engine, replace the graphical user interface with a natural language interface, and replace blunt security permissions with intelligent behavioral guardianship. The operating system won't die in a dramatic crash, it will just simply fade away, and as the command line did, and it will still be there, maybe humming away under the hood for engineers and developers, but it will be entirely invisible to just a regular end user. And in its place will emerge a quiet, omnipresent intelligence, one that frees us from the mechanics of computing and finally lets us focus on what machines were always supposed to help us do in the first place. Think, create, and to live in harmony with the machines.